first part of this subject, what exactly is the ancient otherworld, with comparing neo-shamanism and real shamanism, likening standing stones to political buildings like Parliament, and human light competing with real sunlight. So with part 2, I'd like to discuss the other side of the other world, the more magical side, the more fantastical side. I'd like to present what we in the Romani culture call the bittee fokee. They are the woodland folk who played a very large part in people's lives a long time ago, not just Romani people, but all the simple people that lived all across the land. And it will be interesting to describe what an impact the small people made on life, and also to understand how they fit into the ancient otherworld and how they can maybe fit into our lives today. Our obsession with fairies has in these times really run away with itself, but at the same time it permits us to be quite imaginative, and we can sort of imagine anything in a forest setting. This wasn't always the case a long time ago. Trees were very, very old in earlier times. They lived for thousands of years. There are a few around now, here in Britain, but they were quite plentiful the further back you go, so you can imagine what sort of world you would have lived in. We must remember that the further back you go, the forest was very dense, and woodland paths meant that you were walking right up against the forest, right up against the trees, and the trees were the ones that held all the power. When you think about it, cities, towns, roads, dwellings make up the density now. Trees no longer fulfill that role for us, so it somehow makes sense that we lost our connection to trees in the other world. Some of us have to travel quite a long way to find a park or a wood or just one single tree, so we cannot be expected to retain our knowledge on forest law if access to trees is so limited. You could be attacked magically by any number of woodland creatures, and there are numerous woodland creatures that abound in many parts of Britain, in many parts of Europe. Each small place had their own version of woodland creatures, and sometimes they were ugly, sometimes they were terrifying, sometimes they were old and gnarled, just like an old gnarled tree bark. And they weren't these pretty little fairy-winged beings that we are familiar with today, that probably was invented mostly by the Victorians. We don't really have the influence from them anymore that we used to have. So therefore, life is a little bit duller, a little bit sadder in some ways, because we don't have that interaction with the other world. I in fact used many aspects of power seeking that were presented in Lord of the Rings in the movie, and I often used snippets of the movie so that people could identify with where power, and particularly narcissism, had its root. I believe it had its root when we changed over from hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a civilized lifestyle, and that in fact is presented in the movie Lord of the Rings because it shows many aspects of the Bronze Age and how current civilized thinking was beginning to filter through. Many people were trying to retain an older lifestyle, and even if they were slightly civilizing themselves, they were demonstrating that they still wanted to hang on to what the magical other world could teach them, and those lessons were very powerful indeed. And if we hadn't got the ancient otherworld as it used to be, then we miss out on what these woodland beings can bring to us. It's a good education to have about the way the ancient otherworld works. Whether you were in the Middle Ages or whether you were hunter-gatherers, the woodland creatures played a big part in your life. And that just tells you how long we entertained woodland creatures. If you think of hunter-gatherers 10,000 years ago, and then you think of the Middle Ages just a few hundred years ago, it's quite mind-boggling to think how long we were influenced by many of these creatures. We often talk about witches associated with Halloween and all sorts of ghostly, weird, ghouly, odd things that are associated with this period of time. And it's interesting to look at Halloween and not so much what is attached historically to that, because we know that it comes from something in the deep, distant past, but to look at it with a view to understanding how we still believe that we cut through that thin veil that separates us from the other world. And there we see the ghosts, and there we see the superstitions, and there we see all the things that we are sometimes very afraid of, or if not afraid, sometimes we have fun with. We even have ghost parties. We have all sorts of things where we have blood dripping down and making fun of the most odd things that, if that were really to happen, we would never want to do at all. We don't have the connection with the upper world and the lower world, and whether you had that in your culture, you still feared the forests kind of engulfing you and driving you down into the ground where your worst fears might come to life. The woodland creatures were in charge of that kind of thing. And whether you went up to meet the giants, whether you went down to meet the forest people who lived under the ground, you were always aware of what lurked. You were still a little bit wary of what you did every day. That doesn't affect us now. We can do anything now, and nothing, well, we feel that nothing will ever come back on us. Luck, good luck, bad luck, entities, influences, omens, all those things are really a thing of the past now, unfortunately. Fortune telling is something that has been in the Romani gypsy culture for hundreds and hundreds of years, and some of them have made their living out of it. I was going to say fortune, but it's not actually quite accurate, I don't think. But the idea of fortune telling comes straight out of the other world, but you have to be a certain kind of person to be able to do this, and many Romani gypsy women had that about them. They could look someone straight in the eye and tell where they'd been, what they were doing, where they were going to, and I think it's a really valuable craft. But I think, again, that's quite weakened and cheapened today by some folk who believe they're hugely, powerfully psychic, and really they don't know what is involved with the craft, that it takes a lot of understanding life's lessons and a lot about understanding the way society is, the way people are, the way we tick. There's a lot of psychology in it, and there's a lot of foresight and insight in it. So you have to be quite worked out yourself to read a palm, or to read the cards for someone, or to contact the other world, to talk to somebody in that famous old magical way. We're still on that journey. We're still seeking the answer to what an overabundance of power in our life means. And we're still on that pilgrimage. Maybe we're still trying to ditch the ring. Maybe we're still trying to offload the power to the source it came from, just like they do in the movie. I don't know, but it leaves you with some rather interesting questions to ask yourself. I wanted to end this video with a return to the ancient woodlands. Ancient woodlands are of course severely under threat in many parts of the world, and when we look at an ancient tree or stand in a bluebell wood, we're not simply looking at a tree and a few flowers. We're looking at an ancient connection to a world which used to live within our very souls. A world we lost as civilization dug its claws into the fabric of our communities, meaning there was no more common sense related to Earth to guide us through life. We lost our stories, and along with losing our stories, we lost our dreams of what life is all about, especially the way the other world taught us about life. Can we stay loyal to a world we no longer connect with in everyday life? Perhaps the answer is that we need to keep asking questions rather than feel that we have all the answers. We just need to keep asking the same question. Exactly what is the ancient otherworld? And then perhaps that will take us closer to how it really used to be in times gone by.